Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today in PubStomp MTG, and in today's video I'm going to be discussing one of the best commanders, in my opinion. At least it's one of my favorite commanders of the entire set of Duskmourn, and it's none other than the big bad guy himself, Valgavoth, Hour of Souls. And to me this one is absolutely fun as a commander itself, so let's read what it does. So for 2 black and a red, it's a legendary creature, Elder Demon with flying and ward, pay 2 life. Whenever an opponent loses life for the first time during each of their turns, put a +1/+1 counter on Valgavoth, Hour of Souls, and draw a card, and he does have a 4/4 body. So what makes this card absolutely special is the fact that it definitely is going to be leaning towards a group slug / burn strategy. If you have been watching this channel for a while, you probably know I love burn strategies as a mono red player myself. It's going full into the theme of taking life out of your opponents so that you could get the most out of it, making Valgavoth absolutely huge and drawing cards. We'll give you a warning though, this deck is not for the faint of heart, at least for your opponents. So if you do have people that do get a little salty in your play group, this is definitely not the deck to play against them, because this will make you lose friends for sure. This is going to be leaning towards a high power deck focusing on a lot of Punisher and burn themes, because we want to get the most out of our commander's ability to draw cards and put +1/+1 counters on it. But let's waste no more time, let's talk about Valgavoth and some cards that you should put in this deck. So in this deck, we're bringing the heat to our opponents. There's a lot of disgusting options that we could take advantage of in the deck. As the saying goes, no pain, no gain. Let's talk about Sulfuric Vortex and Roiling Vortex. These work perfectly with our commander because we want damage to happen to our opponents on each of their upkeeps. So Sulfuric Vortex does read at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Sulfuric Vortex deals 2 damage to that player. On the downside, it will happen to us. We will take damage, but our opponents will take damage too, and we'll take advantage of those damage effects. Plus, it does read if a player would gain life, that player gains no life instead. So that's a nice added bonus against those mono white players that like to play life gain. But I feel like Roiling Vortex ups the ante because it's 1 less mana, and at each player's upkeep, Roiling Vortex deals 1 damage to them. And whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, Roiling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player. Also, you could pay 1 red mana, your opponents can't gain life this turn. I like this one because it's more of a meta call. Most of my players in my play group love to play free spells, so this one will definitely deal a lot of damage to them when they are too greedy with those free spells. Speaking of being greedy with casting too much spells, Painful Quandary is another excellent choice. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player loses 5 life unless they discard a card. So what's nice about this card is the fact that we're getting card advantage off our opponent's pain. So it's either we get a draw card, they lose 5 life, or they have to discard a card and not really have card advantage. So either way, it's going to be a win-win for us in this situation. And you know what I really hate? When people try to play spells on my turn. So Scytheclaw Raptor is an excellent choice to really punish those who try to play stuff on my turn, or really on anybody else's turn, because whenever a player casts a spell, if it's not their turn, Scytheclaw Raptor deals 4 damage to them. So I like this effect. It's clean, it's simple, just no casting spells on each other's turns, unless they want to suffer the consequences of getting 4 damage dealt to them. Because it takes mana to cast spells, why not punish people for even tapping mana? For example, we could use Mana Barbs, as well as Burning Earth. I personally like Burning Earth a little bit better because whenever a player taps a non-basic land for mana, Burning Earth deals 1 damage to that player. This one is specifically good in a meta situation where people are playing 3-color decks or higher. Because we're playing 2-color, it's not going to affect us as much. I mean, it will affect us in some situations, but more likely if you're playing against a player that has 3 or more colors, it's going to punish them way more. And also, not a lot of people play basics anymore, so really we're going to be punishing everybody. Let's stay on the topic of punishing people with lands with Zozu the Punisher. This is incredible, especially against those landfall decks, or really any kind of deck that has fetch lands in them, because whenever a land enters the battlefield, Zozu the Punisher deals 2 damage to that land's controller. Because we are an Rakdos color combination, we don't have as much fetch lands in this deck list specifically, but again, those 3 or more colors are definitely going to have a lot more because they need to fix their mana. So we're punishing for all sorts of things, but we could also punish for creatures by using Rampaging Ferocidon. It has that ability whenever another creature enters the battlefield, Rampaging Ferocidon deals 1 damage to that creature's controller. Again, you'll notice with a lot of these effects, they will affect us too, but that's okay because it's half the fun, honestly, where everybody has a low life total and just trying to see who could duke it out for the win. Going back to Rampaging Ferocidon, I love my dinosaurs, and this is no exception. This got banned in Standard at one point because of how broken it was against life gain strategies, and I would know because I actually played that deck in Standard. But I would say one of the most important things that you can do in Commander is draw cards. A lot of people try to find a lot of card advantage engines so that they could get a lot of cards in hand to cast more spells, and sometimes it's a little too greedy, and we need to punish that too. So some simple ways to do that is by using some enchantments like Underworld Dreams and the enchantment creature Fate Unraveler. Whenever opponent draws a card, Underworld Dreams or Fate Unraveler deals 1 damage to that player. A cheaper option that I would recommend is from the new set, Razorkin Needlehead. So for 2 red mana, it does have first strike during your turn, and whenever opponent draws a card, Razorkin Needlehead deals 1 damage to them. So all these effects are pretty good because it's going to happen at the beginning of that player's upkeep, because they're going to have to draw a card at the beginning of their upkeep anyways, so we get to deal damage to them with these effects. Well, technically the cheapest version, but there is a stipulation of having a red permanent on the battlefield, is Cataract Parasite. For 1 black mana, whenever opponent draws a card, if you have a red permanent, you may have Cataract Parasite deal 1 damage to that player. So again, just another way where we could just have that redundancy effect of dealing damage to our opponents so that we can get that card draw and buffing up our commander. If people are growing out of control with their Rhystic Studies or Mystic Remoras, we might as well include Orcish Bowmasters. Everybody knows what this card does. It's a modern all-star. It has flash, and when it enters the battlefield and whenever an opponent draws a card except the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, Orcish Bowmasters deals 1 damage to any target, then amass works 1. So I would say this is a pretty mean card. Obviously a lot of people usually try to ping down mana dorks along the way when people draw cards, and I don't necessarily want to do it unless it's like an Esper Sentinel on the battlefield with 1 power and 1 toughness. But I would rather ping that player that is on their turn so that I could get that extra card draw and put a 1/1 counter on the commander. But I would say the best effect that you could take advantage of for card draw is Shieldred the Apocalypse, mainly because whenever you draw a card you gain 2 life, and whenever opponent draws a card they lose 2 life. So this is absolutely brutal compared to the rest of them, because people are going to be losing 2 life per card draw, all the while you're going to be gaining 2 life per card draw too. I feel like Valgavoth was perfectly made with Shieldred in mind, because obviously with Shieldred, whenever opponent draws a card at the beginning of their upkeep they lose 2 life, and because they lost 2 life, Valgavoth will trigger and you draw a card and then you gain 2 life. But I will say Shieldred is quite pricey, in the $80s to $90 range, so if you have a proxy and everybody is good with you proxying, more the merrier. But let's increase the pain to our enemies and talk about some cards to really amplify the damage to our opponents. So let's throw in some damage doublers like Sulfim Mayhem Dominus. I did make a group slug deck with Sulfim Mayhem Dominus last year when Phyrexia All Will Be One came out, and it is a pretty brutal deck, but not as brutal as this deck because Valgavoth gives you card advantage to get more group slug cards. But going back to Sulfim, it's incredible because if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. So obviously with a lot of pinging effects, you can see where this goes. It's just going to be dealing double the damage when we go to our opponent's face. But I will say a lot of effects we do have in our deck will deal 1 damage to our opponents, so cards like Torbrand, Thane of Redfell is going to be a great addition, because if a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So this could really stack up the damage depending on what kind of cards we have on the battlefield. For example, if we have like a Rolling Vortex, we're going to be dealing 3 damage to each opponent while dealing 1 damage to ourselves, because remember with Torbrand, it would be dealing damage to our opponents, not ourselves. A card I personally like better because of how metal it looks is Oher Ashenil Deepest Might. Again, because most cards in our deck will deal 1 damage to our opponents, Oher Ashenil's ability will change that. If a red source you control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than Oher Ashenil's power to an opponent, that source would deal damage equal to Oher Ashenil's power instead. So for example, if we had like a Mana Barbs on the battlefield, when somebody taps for a land, Mana Barbs will deal 1 damage to that player, but if we have Oher Ashenil on the battlefield, we would be dealing 4 damage instead, and if people tap for any more lands, their life is going to dwindle very quickly. Just like Torbrand though, Oher Ashenil is not going to affect us, it's only going to be affecting our opponents. So if we have a Mana Barbs on the battlefield, we tap for mana, we're only going to be dealing 1 damage to ourselves, all the while when our opponents tap for mana, they're going to be dealing 4 damage per land. So again, Oher Ashenil, we're doing a lot of small incremental damages here and there, like 1 or even 2 damage. So stepping up to 4 or even higher depending on how big Oher Ashenil is going to be incredible just to stack more damage on top of it. And the last card I did want to highlight, because it's a demon and our commander is a demon, why not mention Archfiend of Despair? It was reprinted in the Commander Master set, and this is a great include in the deck because at the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life that player lost this turn. Every time I play this card, the game turns into a clock. So whether people are attacking or we're punishing our opponents with our Punisher effects, our opponents are going to be losing so much life. This is going to be ending the game very quickly. So with all that said, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Valgavoth Hour of Souls. Again, I find this commander extremely powerful. I know it's not as powerful as Ob-Nixilis Captive Kingpin, but I'm glad it's not, because this is more of a group slug commander, all the while Ob-Nixilis is more of a CDH commander. Besides that point, what are your thoughts and opinions about Valgavoth Hour of Souls? There's a lot lot of cards that you could add into the deck to make it absolutely brutal. There are some of my suggestions. Is there any suggestions that you'd list down below in the comments? Again, I would love to hear your thoughts. Also, just to give you a tip about this deck, definitely play Exquisite Blood. You won't regret it because whenever opponent loses life, you gain that much life. I know there's a lot of effects that say players can gain life, but if you have this effect on the battlefield, a lot of people are going to be losing a lot of life and you're gaining that life, and most Punisher effects will be affecting you. So you'll want to have that way of mitigating the damage. So again, Exquisite Blood is another tip that I would recommend putting in the deck. Besides that point, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.